Hashtag Triple H ends Lesnar'S era. The Kingdom Falls. The phone call lasted exactly 97 seconds. And in those 97 seconds, Triple H, the man who built NXT from nothing, the executive who reshaped WWE's entire philosophy, the cerebral assassin who thought he'd seen every possible crisis and handled every imaginable catastrophe, delivered news that ended the career of the most dangerous human being to ever step foot in a wrestling ring. Brock Lesnar's era is over. Not because of age. Not because of injury. Not because he decided it was time to walk away on his own terms with dignity and legacy intact, but because Bron Breakker, that young, hungry, reckless embodiment of controlled chaos wearing the same last name that built WWE into an empire, did something so catastrophically stupid, so professionally suicidal, so legally and financially devastating that Triple H had no choice but to end everything. And when I say end everything, I mean everything. Brock's guaranteed appearances. His special attraction status. His ability to show up whenever he wants and collect 7 figures for 15 minutes of work. His position as the nuclear option, the final boss, the beast incarnate that WWE could always deploy when they needed to create an instant main event. Gone. Finished. Terminated. Over. Because of what Bron Breakker did. Because of how Brock Lesnar responded. And because Triple H, for all his legendary ruthlessness and willingness to do whatever business requires, finally reached the point where even he said this has gone too far and someone has to pay the price. That someone is Brock Lesnar. And the wrestling world is still trying to process what this means. Let me take you inside that arena. Inside that locker room. Inside that exact moment when everything went sideways and a simple physical altercation between two wrestlers became the incident that forced WWE's most powerful executive to make the most difficult decision of his career. It started as most disasters do. With arrogance. With disrespect. With someone young and talented mistaking confidence for invincibility and forgetting that certain legends aren't legends because of carefully constructed images but because they're genuinely capable of extreme violence. Bron Breakker had been on an absolute tear. Destroying everyone. Talking endless trash. Claiming he was better than anyone from any generation, making comparisons to his family's legendary status while simultaneously dismissing everyone who came before him as inferior products of an easier era. And he made one critical mistake. One fatal error in judgment that someone with his last name and his family connection should have known better than to make. He called out Brock Lesnar, by name, on live television, with that cocky smirk that said I'm untouchable and there's nothing any old-timer can do to humble me. Brock Lesnar, the so-called beast incarnate. The part-timer who shows up 4 times a year, collects his check, and disappears while guys like me do the actual work of carrying this company. You want to know what a real beast looks like? Look at me. You want to know what dominance actually means? Watch my matches. You want to know who the future is? I'm standing right here, and you're sitting at home counting money from a career that's been over for years. The words echoed through that arena like a death sentence being pronounced. Because everyone, and I mean everyone except apparently Bron Breakker, knows that you don't call out Brock Lesnar. You don't question his legitimacy. You don't dismiss his accomplishments. And you absolutely don't challenge him unless you're prepared for consequences that extend far beyond normal wrestling physicality. Question for you watching right now: if you were backstage and heard Bron say those words, would you have tried to stop what came next? Or would you have just gotten out of the way and let destiny unfold? Let me know in the comments. Brock Lesnar wasn't even scheduled to be at that show. He was home in Saskatchewan, probably training or hunting or doing whatever the hell Brock Lesnar does when he's not cashing checks that have more zeros than most people see in a lifetime. But someone sent him that clip. Someone made sure the beast incarnate saw every word of Bron Breakker's disrespectful, career-ending challenge. And Brock made a phone call. To Paul Heyman first. Then to Triple H. And the message was simple and absolutely terrifying in its calm directness. I'm coming to SmackDown this week, and I'm going to have a conversation with the Breakker kid. Handle it however you want, but I'm having that conversation. Not a request. Not a negotiation. A statement of fact delivered by someone who has never in his life been told no when it actually mattered. Triple H tried. You have to give him credit, he tried every possible diplomatic solution. Called Bron into his office. Explained in explicit detail why antagonizing Brock Lesnar was potentially the worst decision he could make. Offered alternatives. Suggested apologies. Pitched storylines where both men could save face. And Bron Breakker, with all the wisdom of youth and none of the caution that comes from experience, refused. Doubled down. Said he meant every word and he'd say it again to Brock's face if given the opportunity. Congratulations, kid. You just got your wish. And it's going to cost you everything. SmackDown that week had an energy that veterans recognized immediately. The locker room was tense. Security was doubled. Producers were on high alert. Everyone knew Brock was in the building. Everyone knew Bron wasn't backing down. And everyone knew that when those two forces collided, the results would be somewhere between spectacular and catastrophic. The segment was supposed to be controlled. A face-to-face confrontation. Some heated words. Maybe a shove. Then officials would separate them, commercial break, and everyone moves on with the storyline intact and no actual damage done. That's not what happened. Brock walked to that ring like a man with a very specific purpose. No pyro. No elaborate entrance. Just the entrance music and a 280-pound former UFC heavyweight champion who looked like he was deciding exactly how much pain to inflict before officials could intervene. Bron Breakker stood in that ring, championship over his shoulder, chin up, refusing to show even a hint of intimidation even though everyone watching could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. That moment of "oh god, this is really happening" mixed with "I'm too far committed to back down now." The stare down was electric. Two genetic freaks. Two athletes operating at levels normal humans can't comprehend. Two men with legitimate fighting backgrounds and the ability to hurt each other in ways that transcend worked professional wrestling. And then Bron made his second fatal mistake of this entire saga. He shoved Brock. Hard. Two-handed push to the chest that actually moved the beast incarnate back a step. The arena's collective intake of breath was audible, because everyone including Bron knew that cross a line that can't be uncrossed. That violated the unspoken rule about how these confrontations work. That gave Brock Lesnar justification to respond with violence that would be impossible to condemn as unprovoked. What happened next lasted maybe 15 seconds but will be analyzed and discussed for years. Brock didn't shove back. Didn't engage in the normal pushing and shoving that precedes most wrestling brawls. He pivoted, closed the distance, and executed a takedown so fast, so explosive, so technically perfect that it was less professional wrestling and more MMA fighter remembering muscle memory from years of actual combat sports. Bron Breakker hit the mat hard. Brock mounted him, and started throwing punches that weren't worked wrestling strikes. These were closed-fist shots with bad intentions, with the weight of a legitimate heavyweight fighter behind them, with the accuracy and power that comes from someone who spent years in an octagon where the goal was actual combat victory. The sound of knuckles connecting with skull echoed through the arena. Once, twice, 3 times before officials even reached the ring. 4 more times before enough bodies piled on to physically restrain Brock Lesnar, which required approximately 8 men because when the beast decides he's not done, moving him requires overwhelming force. They finally separated them, pulled Brock away, surrounded Bron who was bleeding from his eyebrow and his nose, looking dazed, looking like he just discovered the difference between wrestling tough and actual tough. But Brock wasn't done, because Bron, even bloodied, even clearly outmatched, couldn't shut his mouth. Started yelling threats, started promising revenge. Started saying things that made veteran wrestlers backstage physically cringe because they knew exactly how this was about to escalate. And Brock Lesnar, the dead-eyed expression that fighters get when they've moved past anger into cold calculation, broke free from security. Not dramatically, not with a huge struggle. He just decided he was going to move and 10 grown men couldn't actually stop him. He charged across that ring. Officials tried to intercept. Brock went through them like they were cardboard cutouts. Grabbed Bron Breakker again. And this time there was no mounted position, no controlled strikes, no semblance of this being a worked altercation. Brock picked Bron up. Not for a suplex. Not for a signature move. Just picked him up like he weighed nothing and threw him. Literally hurled him over the top rope to the outside where Bron landed in a heap that looked and sounded legitimately dangerous. The crowd didn't know how to react. This had crossed from entertaining chaos into genuine concern for someone's safety. Commentators struggled to maintain kayfabe while also conveying the seriousness of what was happening. Producers were screaming in headsets trying to figure out how to cut away without making it worse. Honest question, at what point does a physical altercation go from wrestling angle to actual assault? Where's that line? And did Brock cross it? Give me your take in the comments because this is complicated. Brock finally allowed himself to be escorted backstage. Not because he was forced. Because he decided he was done. He'd made his point. He'd answered Bron Breakker's challenge in the most definitive way possible, and now whatever happened next was up to WWE management. Triple H was already in his office when Brock arrived. Paul Heyman was there too, and the conversation that followed, according to multiple sources who were close enough to hear, was the kind of frank discussion that happens when friendship and business intersect in the worst possible way. "You can't do that, Paul." Not addressing Brock directly, but speaking to Heyman as the intermediary. "You cannot throw legitimate strikes on live television. You cannot injure talent regardless of provocation. You cannot put me in a position where I have to explain to lawyers and insurers and network executives why my biggest part-time attraction just committed assault on camera." Heyman tried, defended Brock, explained that Bron threw the first strike, argued that wrestlers have always settled issues physically and this was no different than 100 other backstage altercations that happened over decades. But Triple H wasn't hearing it, Because this wasn't a backstage altercation. This was on live television, with cameras capturing every moment, with millions of witnesses, with legal exposure that extended far beyond normal wrestling business concerns. Bron was out of line, Triple H continued. His words were disrespectful and his push crossed a boundary, but your response was disproportionate, and it puts both of you, and this entire company, in legal jeopardy that I cannot ignore. The silence that followed was heavy, because everyone in that room knew what came next, knew that lines had been crossed that couldn't be uncrossed, knew that decisions were about to be made that would change careers and storylines and the entire trajectory of WWE programming. Effective immediately, Triple H said, and you could hear the weight in his voice because this wasn't something he wanted to do. Brock Lesnar's contract is suspended pending legal review. All scheduled appearances are cancelled. All storyline plans involving you are being rewritten. This is not a work. This is not an angle. This is real consequences for real actions that crossed real boundaries. Paul Heyman started to protest. Triple H raised a hand, cutting him off. Paul, I love you. You know I do. And Brock, you're one of the greatest to ever do this. But I have a responsibility to every person in that locker room. I have a responsibility to this company. And I cannot allow anyone, regardless of their status or their legacy or how much money they make, to legitimately injure talent on live television. The finality in his voice was unmistakable. This wasn't a negotiation. This wasn't a starting position in a discussion. This was the decision, made by the one person in WWE with the authority to make it and the willingness to enforce it even against someone as powerful and valuable as Brock Lesnar. Here's where it gets even more complex. Because Bron Breakker wasn't blameless. His disrespect started this. His physical shove escalated it. His continued provocation even while being beaten down prolonged it. So what happens to him? Triple H addressed that too. Fined Bron an amount that made his eyes water. Suspended him for 2 weeks without pay. Stripped him of his championship opportunity that had been scheduled. Made absolutely clear that while he was the victim of disproportionate response, he was also the instigator of a situation that never should have happened. You wanted to be treated like a main eventer? Triple H told him, according to sources. Congratulations. Main eventers face real consequences when they create real problems. Your family name doesn't protect you. Your talent doesn't excuse you. Your youth doesn't forgive you. You screwed up. And you're paying for it. The locker room response was fascinating. Split right down the middle. Veterans mostly sided with management, understanding that Brock crossed a line but also acknowledging that Bron's disrespect invited disaster. Younger wrestlers mostly sided with Bron, seeing him as someone who refused to bow to legends and paid an unfair price for challenging the established hierarchy. That division created its own tensions. Arguments backstage. Wrestlers taking sides publicly on social media. The entire roster fracturing over a single incident that exposed deeper philosophical differences about respect, hierarchy, and how conflicts should be handled. Question for everyone: who are you siding with in this situation? Team Brock for defending his legacy against disrespect? Team Bron for refusing to worship at the altar of past generations? Or Team Triple H for trying to maintain order in an impossible situation? Comments section, let's debate. But here's the nuclear bombshell that most people still don't fully understand. This wasn't just about suspending Brock for one incident. This was Triple H using this opportunity to fundamentally restructure how WWE operates. For years, Brock Lesnar's contract gave him unprecedented freedom. Show up when he wants. Work the dates he chooses. Command astronomical money for minimal appearances. Operate under completely different rules than every other talent on the roster. And while that made business sense when WWE needed that special attraction, when they needed someone who felt bigger than the product to create marquee moments, it also created resentment. It created a two-tier system where some wrestlers were treated like employees and others like independent contractors who could dictate terms. Triple H has been trying to change that culture. Trying to create a more equitable system where talent is valued but nobody is above the team. Where star power matters but doesn't grant immunity from standards and expectations that everyone else has to follow. Brock Lesnar's suspension isn't just punishment for one altercation. It's a message to every current and future superstar. You can be the biggest draw. You can main event WrestleMania. You can make millions of dollars. But you cannot be above the rules. You cannot operate without accountability. You cannot hurt people and hide behind your status. That's revolutionary for WWE. That's changing the fundamental power dynamics that have existed for decades. That's Triple H using his position to reshape the company culture in ways Vince McMahon never did, because Vince always believed that stars should get special treatment because they're what draws money. The financial implications alone are staggering. Brock's contract likely guarantees him millions regardless of whether he works. Suspending him means WWE pays that money without getting the appearances and the ratings and the pay-per-view buys he generates. That's not a decision you make lightly. That's not a business move driven by profit margins. That's a principle-driven decision that costs real money to enforce. And that tells you everything about how serious Triple H is about this new era of WWE operations. He's willing to lose money in the short term to establish standards that will benefit the company long term. He's willing to piss off one of the biggest stars in wrestling history to send a message to the entire roster about expectations and consequences. The legal situation is equally complex. Bron Breakker could legitimately sue. He was assaulted on camera. He has injuries that required medical attention. He has witnesses and video evidence and a clear case that Brock Lesnar committed battery regardless of provocation. But pursuing that lawsuit would probably end his WWE career, would make him radioactive to other promotions who don't want litigious talent, would mark him as someone who takes shoot fights to courts instead of settling them like wrestlers have always settled them. So Bron is stuck, accepting an outcome he probably finds deeply unjust. Watching the man who legitimately hurt him face suspension while he also faces punishment for starting the conflict. Living with injuries and humiliation and the knowledge that challenging Brock Lesnar was possibly the worst decision of his young career. The wrestling media has been feasting on this story. Every outlet with different takes. Some praising Triple H for finally holding a major star accountable. Others criticizing him for overreacting to what they see as a normal physical altercation between wrestlers. Still others suggesting this is all an elaborate work designed to create buzz and that Brock will be back in a month like nothing happened. But everyone backstage insists this is real. This is legitimate. This is Triple H making a statement that will define his tenure as WWE's chief content officer. This is the line in the sand that separates the old WWE from the new WWE. Quick poll, do you think Brock Lesnar ever comes back to WWE after this? Or is his career genuinely over? Give me your prediction right now. Here's what nobody is talking about enough. The impact on Brock Lesnar's legacy. Because regardless of how this ultimately resolves, this incident will forever be part of his story. Not the UFC championship. Not the WrestleMania main events. Not the undefeated streak being broken or the countless title reigns. The time he got suspended for legitimately beating up a young wrestler on live television. The time his career potentially ended not because he declined physically or lost passion for the business, but because he couldn't control his temper and crossed a line that even WWE couldn't ignore. That's a tragic ending for someone who revolutionized professional wrestling, who proved that legitimate combat sports credentials could coexist with sports entertainment, who became the most special attraction in wrestling history by being genuinely different from everyone else. But legacy is complicated. Mike Tyson is remembered as one of the greatest boxers ever and also as someone who bit Evander Holyfield's ear. Both things are true simultaneously. Brock Lesnar can be an all-time great and also someone whose career ended in disgrace because he couldn't handle a young wrestler's disrespect appropriately. History will judge this harshly. Not just Brock, but everyone involved. Triple H for how he handled it. Bron for instigating it. WWE for the systems and culture that allowed it to happen. The entire wrestling business for creating an environment where conflicts escalate to violence and everyone just accepts it as normal until someone finally says this has to stop. The ripple effects will be felt for years. Younger wrestlers will learn from Bron's mistake. Veterans will reassess how they respond to disrespect. Management will implement new protocols for handling confrontations. The entire industry will have conversations about physicality and consent and what's acceptable in a business built on simulated violence. And through it all, one truth remains. Brock Lesnar's era is over. Not because he got old. Not because fans stopped caring. But because Triple H made a decision that prioritizes principle over profit, accountability over star power, the long-term health of the company over the short-term boost that Brock's presence provides. That's leadership. That's courage. That's making the hard choice even when the easy choice would be to look the other way, slap some fines around, and pretend this was all just a work that got people talking. But it's also sad. Because Brock Lesnar deserved a better ending. A retirement match at WrestleMania. A farewell speech thanking fans for the journey. A Hall of Fame induction where everyone celebrates his incredible career. Not this. Not a suspension that might become a termination. Not lawyers and investigations and his final chapter being written by legal departments instead of creative teams. Bron Breakker got humbled in the most brutal way possible. He learned a lesson that will shape the rest of his career. He discovered that talent and family name and confidence mean nothing when you disrespect someone who is legitimately capable of hurting you and willing to do so. Maybe that makes him better long-term. Maybe the humility this experience forced on him becomes the foundation for a career that learns from mistakes instead of repeating them. Maybe 20 years from now we look back at this as the moment Bron Breakker became a true professional instead of just a talented kid with a famous name. Or maybe it breaks him. Maybe the embarrassment and the injuries and the public nature of his defeat creates psychological scars that prevent him from ever reaching his full potential. Maybe he never recovers the confidence and swagger that made him special in the first place. Time will tell. But right now, in this moment, everyone involved is dealing with consequences. Brock is suspended, possibly finished. Bron is injured and humiliated. Triple H is managing a crisis that threatens to become a legal nightmare. WWE is scrambling to rewrite months of storylines and explain to sponsors and network partners why their biggest attraction just committed assault on live television. There are no winners here, only different levels of losing.